What if I told you that the FIA had just banned a legal move that gave Mercedes a direct advantage just when they were one step ahead of everyone, and that now Ferrari could be the big beneficiary of all this change? What has just happened is not a simple update of the regulations. It is a clear sign that the battle for the new era of Formula One has already begun and is being fought in the most invisible details of the sport. Because while many were looking at the results on the track, in the shadows an advantage was brewing that could completely change the competitive order of 2026. Everything revolves around an element that will redefine Formula One, the MGUK. This electrical component not only gains prominence in the new regulations, but also becomes the heart of the car's performance. We are talking about 350 kilowatts of electrical power, a brutal figure that, combined with the combustion engine, completely transforms the way in which cars deliver speed. But this is where the first key point of this story comes in: the regulations. The FIA established that this power could not remain constant until the end of the straights. It had to be reduced progressively, going down in stages to protect the systems. In theory, all teams were required to follow that same rule. In theory, because in practice, not everyone was playing the same game. Mercedes and Red Bull found something that the rest did not see or did not know how to take advantage of, an exception within the regulations designed for critical situations. If a system detected a failure, the MGUK could be turned off immediately without continuing this gradual reduction. And this is where the trick is born. Instead of using that feature as a security measure, they turned it into a strategic tool. They forced this shutdown right at the end of the fastest lap, which allowed them to maintain maximum power for longer than allowed. That is to say, while other cars were already losing performance in the final stretch, they continued pushing with everything until the last meter. The gain, although it may seem small, was devastating in ranking. Thousandths that in Formula One make the difference between pole and the third row. And the most impressive thing is that the system's penalty of the 60-second block of the MGUK did not really affect it because it coincided with the return trip to the pits. It was a clean benefit without competitive cost. This leaves us with an uncomfortable reality. They weren't breaking the rules, they were showing that they understood them better than anyone else. And this is where Ferrari comes in. Because while Mercedes and Red Bull exploited this loophole, Ferrari did not follow that path. And that, at first, seemed like a clear disadvantage. But everything changed when suspicions, formal consultations, and pressure on the FIA began. The question was no longer whether it was legal, but whether it was fair. And at that exact point, the FIA made a decision that changes everything, prohibiting this use of the system, closing the door to one of the most intelligent and controversial solutions in recent years. What seemed like technical genius now becomes a weapon removed from a game. And with that, the board resets. But what is truly important is not what has been prohibited, but what this means. Because if Mercedes and Red Bull were willing to go to this level to find performance, how many other areas will they be exploiting that have not yet come to light? But here's where this story gets a lot deeper, because the ban doesn't just remove a trick, it reveals something much more important: who was really ahead in the technology race to 2026, and who might have been unknowingly at a disadvantage. When the FIA decides to intervene, it does so not only as a matter of legality, but also because of the impact this could have on the competitive balance. Because if this system was maintained, Mercedes and Red Bull would not only have an advantage in qualifying, they would be building their entire engine philosophy around that optimization. And that changes absolutely everything. Because in Formula One, when a team finds performance in a key area, it is not something isolated. It is the beginning of a development chain. That MGUK trick was not the end, it was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind that idea there are simulations, energy maps, thermal management, integration with the rest of the hybrid system, a complete concept that could make a difference for years. By eliminating it, the FIA not only cuts the current advantage, it forces us to rethink that entire path. And this is where Ferrari starts to smile. Because while other teams were investing time, resources, and development into perfecting this system, Ferrari seemed to be going in another direction. What could previously be interpreted as a technical disadvantage now becomes stability. You don't have to redo concepts, you don't have to redesign your energy approach, you don't have to start from scratch in this area. And in an era where every development decision is worth millions, that's pure gold. In addition, there is an effect that many are overlooking, the psychological one. Mercedes and Red Bull had found a way to squeeze the regulations to the limit. That generates internal confidence, a feeling of superiority, a foundation on which to build. But when the FIA steps in and removes that advantage, you don't just lose performance, you lose direction. You lose a clear line of development. Ferrari, on the other hand, receives the opposite message. The path they were following was not wrong. And that reinforces everything. But there is something even more delicate in all this, because this decision opens a dangerous door. If the FIA has intervened here, where is the limit? How many other gray solutions are now under the microscope? Because Formula One has always lived on that border between the legal and the interpretive. And when the regulatory body begins to close those gray areas, teams have to change the way they innovate. It's no longer just about being more inventive, but about anticipating what will be allowed tomorrow. And that introduces uncertainty, an uncertainty that can stop some and benefit others. Because while some hesitate, others move forward. And the big question that this act leaves is inevitable. If this was the trick that came to light, what other weapons are still hidden waiting for the perfect moment to change the game? And this is where it all fits, because this decision is not really about the present, it is about the immediate future of Formula One. What the FIA has done is not just ban a brilliant trick, it has redefined the starting point for all teams for 2026. Because right now, in the technical departments of Mercedes and Red Bull, there is not only frustration, there is a forced restructuring. All that knowledge, all that development focused on maximizing that window of the regulations loses value from one day to the next. And in Formula One, losing development time is the closest thing to losing a season before it starts. This means something key. The engine concept they were building is no longer as solid as it seemed. And when that happens, there are two paths. Either you react quickly and find a new advantage, or you enter a spiral of corrections that makes you lose your way. Meanwhile, Ferrari is in a completely different position. They don't have to correct. They don't have to redo. They don't have to improvise. They can continue moving forward. And that, in a new regulatory era, is a quiet but devastating advantage. Because while some rebuild, others perfect. But the most important thing in all this is the precedent. The FIA has made it clear that it will not allow interpretations that break the spirit of the regulations, even if they are technically legal. And that changes the mentality of all the teams. From now on, each innovation will not only have to be fast, it will have to be defensible. And that limits the extreme creativity that has historically defined this sport. So we reach the end point of the story, but also the beginning of something much bigger. Mercedes and Red Bull have shown that they were one step ahead in technical interpretation. Ferrari has shown that sometimes not taking that risk can be the best long-term move. And the FIA has shown that it is willing to intervene to maintain the balance. But the real mystery is still up in the air. Because if this battle is already being fought like this, with rules that have not yet come into force, what is going to happen when 2026 really begins and all these concepts come face to face on the track? The story doesn't end here. What we have seen is not simply another technical controversy within Formula One, is a clear warning of where this sport is headed. Because when the FIA decides to intervene in this way, it is sending a direct message to all teams. It is not enough to be smarter. You also have to play within the spirit of the regulations. Mercedes and Red Bull demonstrated something unquestionable. They were one step ahead. They knew how to read between the lines, detect an opportunity, and turn an exception into a real competitive advantage. That, in essence, is Formula One at its finest. But Ferrari has gained something different. It has gained stability. While some have to rethink, adjust, and possibly go back in their development, Ferrari can continue moving forward without interruption. And in a completely new era, like 2026, that can make the difference between chasing or leading. In the end, this story leaves us with a truth that is always repeated in this sport. It is not always the one who finds the best idea who wins, but the one who manages to maintain it. And now everything is open. Because the big battle wasn't this trick. The big battle is everything that comes after. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.